this week. And after this meeting, I think I will have attended every type of meeting that I'm supposed to attend as the director. So then I think I will have, gotten my feet a little wet. And I'm glad that you all are here, because we also noticed this morning that it had the wrong day, but the right date. And originally we had the wrong time. So good for you for showing up despite my errors. So I'm Cammie, the Director of Water and Resource Conservation. I am going to have Autumn take a roll call just so that we can kind of keep track of who all is here. And then for those of you on the task force, and then we have some guests as well. So Autumn, I'm going to hand it over to you real quick.
Emmy Loser.
Here.
Joshua Jimmerfield. David Skinner.
Here.
Casey Hatcher. Josh Pack. Elaine McSpadden.
Here.
Louis Mendoza.
I'm here.
Luis Espino.
Here.
John Messina. Dan Taverner. Tad Walker. We're complete.
Great, thank you. So on our agenda, so we have a number of things on our agenda today, and we also have a guest, Courtney Carpenter from the National Weather Service, and I am going to hand it over to you, Courtney, and Christina, since you were previously running this show, if there's anything that I forget or you want to give me helpful hints, they are more than welcome.
Sure thing. Let me share my screen. Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Courtney Carpenter. I am the warning coordination meteorologist at NWS in Sacramento. I actually just started in April and then went on maternity leave. So getting back up to speed, you may be used to seeing Cindy Matthews at some of these meetings. She's out on extended sick leave through at least the beginning of next year. So if you do have any questions, please direct them my way and I'll do my best to fill in for her or get you the answers that you need. So I'm just going to quickly kind of go through our winter outlook as it stands now, since we're into December. So we had a really wet start to the water year. So if you recall from October, we had a series of pretty wet storms. So we started this water year at, in some cases, over 200% of normal to get things started. And then we got to November and we saw hardly anything. So you can see on the right here, those reds are indicative of, in some places, less than 50% of normal for the month of November. So kind of a tale of 2 months as we get started. So taking a look at the latest drought monitor, we did see a little bit of improvement. We reduced the D4 in portions of the valley in Butte County due to that wet start to October. We did see a little bit of improvement in soil moisture. But again, those reservoir conditions are still running very low due to, a dry, very dry period leading up to that. So these plots right here are a little in depth, but they kind of show the odds of us reaching a normal precipitation water year up here on the top. And you can see this middle panel is the chance of getting back to normal. And we do have fairly good odds just because of that wet October. And we are looking at potentially a pattern change over the next week or so back to some winter weather. So we'll see how it goes. But down here on the bottom is basically the chances of making up from the last really dry water year and this year. You can see the odds of making up all of that precipitation are very low for us. So our winter outlook, as we all know, we should prepare for flood every winter despite being in drought. We get most of our water from those atmospheric river storms. Typically, we see 5 to 7 of those a winter. We've already seen, I believe, 2, including a really wet one in October. When we get fewer of those storms like we saw last winter, obviously we are in drought, and that will continue going forward. So according to the Climate Prediction Center, we are in our second winter of La Nina. So we'll take a look at what that means for our storm track. The top is El Nino, which basically puts the storm track across Southern California. And then La Nina there on the bottom typically drives the storm track up across the Pacific Northwest into Canada. You'll notice in both cases, Northern California is typically in the middle there. So it could go either way as far as that goes. And again, want to stress that our water supply is dependent on those individual storms, and we can't predict those over months in advance. If we take a look at historical weak La Nina years in Northern California, you can see there is kind of a nod towards dry years, but we have seen very wet years and we have seen near normal years. So again, it doesn't really drive what happens with our storm track here. If we take a look at those 3-month outlooks for December, January, and February, you'll notice Northern California has equal chances temperature-wise and sort of on the border between equal chances and below normal precipitation for our winter. So again, you can kind of see the signal for La Nina, really wet in the northwest, dry down south, and leaving us kind of in the middle. As we head for January, February, and March, they're leaning towards below normal temperatures and below normal precipitation. So a reminder, those seasonal outlooks don't capture our individual storms and how much precipitation actually falls. Again, it's best to keep to our forecasts and those partner emails we send out where we can see those storms 7 to 10 days in advance. So basically summing up, La Nina has returned for this winter. We're tilting towards a drier than normal winter with short, intense storms dropping down from the north like we saw in October, and then those very long breaks between storms as we saw for much of November, and we'll see what happens here towards the end of the week into next week, and then further south it will be drier. If you are in this group and are not receiving our partner emails yet, let me know and I can get you on the list. These are your kind of heads up of any weather we're expecting over the next week. This will come out prior to our traditional watches and warnings. So for planning purposes, it's good to get these emails. It has a new color-coded table and details down below, so you can kind of check out very quickly what's coming your way. And if you want to read more into the details, you can, but if not, you at least know that something's coming. So if you're not on the list, you can shoot me an email and I will get you added. Our kind of new outlook does include likelihood and impacts into our risk matrix there. So the higher the likelihood and the higher the impact, you'll see those reds and purple colors. I just wanted a quick reminder for Butte County and for a lot of areas this winter, we do issue official products for those debris flows over recent burn scars. So your flash flood watch is what you should be looking out for a few days in advance. This will give you a heads up that we're expecting weather that may cause debris flows. And then your flash flood warning is kind of your call to action. You should be taking action within the next day or less. We're expecting kind of dangerous conditions. And one way to receive those alerts, if you want kind of an official heads up as soon as we issue it, INWS is a text service or an email that will let you create an account. We can get you authorized, and then you can select an area and set up what alerts you want from us. So this is kind of the partner emails that's 7 days out, and this is a few days out. If you want the official watch or warning, you can get a text message or an email to your phone. It's kind of an old screenshot, but it kind of remains the same. It will show you the watch or warning and then the actual details. So usually as soon as we hit the button in the office, these texts go out pretty immediately. So it's another way for you to get warning and watch information. That's all I have, unless there are any questions.
Great. Does anyone have any questions? I like how everything's kind of equal chances. I'm sorry, go ahead. Who had a question?
Yeah, can you hear me? This is Bill Ehorn with the Department of Water Resources.
Hi,
Hi,
Bill.
Bill.
Hi, I just had a question on those plots that show your chances of probability of whether the temperature or the precip are less or more. the greens and the blues and whatnot based on normal. So I'm just wondering what what the normal is calculated, what years are the normal calculated from and to?
So the new normals just got released and they're from 1981 to 2010. So it's the latest 30-year climate chunk that got updated earlier this year.
Right, because as the climate changes, that the normal is going to change.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
In most cases in Northern California, they got warmer and drier.
Yes.
Good question.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? All right,
Jamie, I'll send a PDF of this if you want it.
that'd be
you can
great. We'll
send
put it
out.
up on our Drought website. So as part of the meeting material. So I would appreciate that. You can send it to me or Autumn.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us. Okay, next we'll go through, there's several things under summary of current conditions, and we'll start out with Kelly, who will give us a 2021 groundwater levels update.
Great, thanks, Cami. This is Kelly Peterson with the Butte County Water and Resource Conservation Department. I'm going to go ahead and get my slides started here. Can you guys see that okay?
We can see the slide and then the next slide. So I don't know if you might want to switch screens.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that work? Okay,
Perfect.
thanks a lot.
I'm glad you knew what to choose.
Barely. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. And it was really good to hear from Courtney, and kind of is a good segue into some of the information that I'm going to talk about here today also. We'll talk about 2021 groundwater levels, but we're also going to start by talking about some of the conditions that we saw leading up to that, to where we are today, including a little bit of information about precipitation for the year, the water year classification, and reservoir conditions. So we can go ahead and start by looking at this, which is the Northern Sierra Precipitation 8-Station Index. Along the bottom, you can see the water year lined out, and a water year spans from October 1 of any given year until September 30th. And that's really intended to capture most of the precipitation for the water year. So as you're looking at that, you can see how much rain has fallen throughout that water year. The 2022 water year, we're currently sitting at about 16 inches of water, which is about 150% of average for the date. And you can see it really compared to some of our wettest years on records and some of our more recent years where we're sitting at. And currently we've already received about half of the total precip that we got last year over the whole year. It's important to remember, though, also that this index is taken from sites that are in the Sierras, the upper Sierras, where you can see in the location there in the upper left-hand corner. So it may or may not be really indicative of the conditions that we're seeing down here in the valley. So it's important to keep that in mind. The water year is also classified, and we call that a water year index. So it's really a look at runoff and a way of doing that. So last water year, which just ended, September 30th, it was classified as a critical year, similar to some of the conditions that we saw in the drought in the 90s, early 90s, and also our most recent drought. You can see there, years 2014 and 2015, we've had about the same conditions in terms of the water year index. This is a graph of our reservoir conditions throughout the state. Right now, Lake Oroville is our closest, and it's sitting at about 30% of capacity and 60% of its historical average. So now we talk a little bit more about groundwater conditions. And when we talk about that, it's good to understand, what we're looking at and where we're looking at conditions. So here is a map of our groundwater monitoring network. There's about 130 groundwater level sites, monitoring wells, but we also have groundwater quality monitoring wells, and these are measured, at least the groundwater levels are measured 4 times a year in coordination with the Northern Region Office of Department of Water Resources. And in this graph, in this map, you can also see our subbasins, which are related to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, as well as some areas that we've identified as specific management areas. Those are color coded. So keep that in mind when we're looking at some of the next information here. But it's also really important to talk about the source of water and how people use water throughout the county. So as you can see, the blue colors in this map are areas where mostly groundwater is being used. And the green areas are areas in the county where most of the use is for using surface water. And there's a few purple areas here and there that actually use a mix of those. So that's also part of the story when you're looking at groundwater conditions. So again, here's a map of our subbasins. And in the next graphic, I've kind of pulled these out. So just so you can sort of see where they fit together, Vina's in the north, Butte's down to the southwest, and then Wyandotte Creek is over near the Feather River and off to the east. So this is a graphic of the most recent groundwater conditions. This is a pulled from a new website put out by the Department of Water Resources called California Groundwater Live. And what you're looking at here is really a looking at recent groundwater level measurements compared to historical measurements for the last for the same month. But the measurements really are looking like there has to be at least 10 years of data for this to be pulled up, and it has to have, the measurement has to have occurred within the last 18 months. So the red dots you see here are conditions that show an all-time low over the last 10 years of data available. The maroon are looking at, if you looked at all of that data for that 10 years, it's looking at and saying that this measurement is within the smallest, the lowest 10th percentile of the measurements available, and so forth and so on as you get to the yellows, the greens, and the blues. So really the blue and the purples are looking at above normal conditions, the greens are looking at normal conditions, and then when you get into the yellows, the maroons, and the reds, those are looking at below normal conditions. So you can see how that changes a little bit throughout the subbasins, but I think it's a really great tool. It's a great way of seeing kind of how we're doing in terms of location in a really quick snapshot. One thing I'd like to talk about also is the My Dry water supply reports. And this is a online household water supply shortage reporting system through DWR also. And so basically when households have had dry wells that are supporting their household uses, this is a form that they can fill out to really help inform state and local agencies for the need for all sorts of assistance. This is the link, how to fill that out. And then that data is actually available on a mapping application called Sigma Data Viewer, as well as the California Groundwater Live website that we just looked at other graphics from. So as of last week, you can see these are the numbers for the reports that we've seen come from Butte County. One through a number of the communities, and then all the way up to Chico, who had we saw about 12 reports coming from there. So you can kind of see how that's dispersed. Most of these are domestic wells, which means that they're relatively shallow. Some are not, but it's one of the things that the person filling out the form can choose to say whether or not it's serving irrigation and domestic uses or just domestic uses. So this is a graphic of where we've seen most of those reports coming from. and the period of time over which we've seen them. So as you can see on the right, the bar graph shows when the reports came in. Most of those came in the middle of summer in August. And the blue dots here are basically the landowners are saying that the problem had been resolved. And so that could probably happen in a number of ways. Either a well got deepened, or perhaps they drilled a new well. But regardless, they reported that the issue had been resolved. And with that, I'll just open it up for any questions.
Does anyone have any questions of Kelly? If you're an attendee too, oh good, we have someone. Let's see who that is. Jim Roback.
I'm wondering if there's any monitoring for groundwater dependent ecosystems or interdependent stream flow having occurring in association with the Drought Task Force.
No, there's not at this moment.
I would say
Okay,
that's all part of what we're doing with the groundwater sustainability plans and the data gaps associated with that process. Is there any other questions? Anne? And Dawson, I see your hand raised.
Okay, hear me now?
Yes.
This may be a bit of a stupid question, but I see the wells up in Cohasset and towards Paradise. Are those considered groundwater, or because I would think they're in rock rather than groundwater? So can somebody tell me?
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely a really good question, because I'm sure a lot of people have that. So groundwater really occurs in two major ways. One of those is down in the valley in the alluvial basins, but you can also have groundwater in the foothill areas like Cohasset, Forest Ranch, as you kind of move your way into the eastern portion of the county and gain elevation. And so the water there is actually stored in sometimes the cracks in the actual substrate underground. And I don't know if anyone has anything additional to add to that.
Yeah, that's right. This is Christina. So yeah, we refer to those areas as fractured rock aquifer systems, but it's still considered groundwater. But it is more difficult to monitor and really understand what the conditions are in the foothill and mountain areas, because the degree to which those fractures are connected or even present in some places or in others is much, much more unpredictable. So it's more challenging to track, and like I said, kind of have representative monitoring in those areas. And therefore, management of groundwater looks different in the valley under Sigma than it does when you get into the foothill mountain areas.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, I see that you raised your hand, but we also have Eric Johnson, so I thought I'd let him go first, and then you, Jim, if that's okay. Go ahead, Eric.
Hey, I was just wondering if anyone has looked at how many of these wells that have gone dry were sort of poorly or inadequately constructed. I know there's a lot of hand dug wells in the county that are pretty shallow.
Yeah, that's a good point, Eric. We have not done that. It's really a voluntary process. So when a landowner has a household well that's gone dry, they can fill out the form in in any manner that they want. So it's a good point, because I meant to mention this earlier, is that you don't even have to put necessarily your total well depth or your address. I mean, you could just put your community to that level, but it's a good point. So we haven't done that. And I don't know, Bill, if you have anything to add to that. Bill Ehorn's with DWR in this program. And I don't know if there's any follow-up from your agency with some of that information. Maybe you can speak to that.
I'm sorry, I was out for a second. What was it? What were you talking about?
Oh, there's a question from Eric. He wanted to know if anybody's followed up with some of the reports from the My Dry Well water supply and whether or not some of these were hand dug wells or if maybe the well went dry because of conditions other than the drought. I think that was the gist of the question.
So just when people call in with their issues, that's when the information's taken down. And then again, we encourage them to enter it all in My Dry Water Supply. So I don't think it goes much further than that, other than if they're out of water, we get a lot of folks that will call back again and that need help, and we're trying to find them help and where they can find water, and also either remedy their problem by lowering a pump or whatnot. And so when that gets done, then it's supposed to be recorded as their water supply being repaired, as when Kelly showed the blue dots on the one map just a little bit ago. But that's about as far as we're going with it. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I think that answers it.
Okay, and Jim Brobeck?
I want to return to the conversation about the foothill wells. For many years, I've heard that all the wells are in fractured rock. And I wonder if, Dr. Buck, if you're aware of the numerous wells, I know in Cohasset and I think also in Forest Ranch, they're quite deep, 700 to 800. I think some are as much as 900 feet deep. They have rather robust yields compared to the wells that are 100 and 200 feet deep that tend to be really reactive to dry weather. And they also have piezometric pressure so that they'll hit the water down below 700 feet, and then it will pop up into the water column as much as 100 feet in some cases that I'm aware of. So I just wanted to know if the department is aware of those developments that have occurred in the past 30 years. I know of wells in Cohasset that were drilled in the early 90s that have these characteristics.
Yeah, this is Christina. I remember you mentioning that before, so that does sound a little bit familiar to me because of that. And I think my description still stands. Those deep wells certainly could be tapping water systems or part of the groundwater system there that is more reliable, that is recharged from higher in the mountain area. We don't know. We haven't done studies on wells like that. So thanks for bringing it up again.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Jim. If anyone, I don't know if anyone has any additional things to add to any of that conversation. All right, thank you, Kelly, for the presentation.
Sure
it was
thing.
Informative and a little different than from the Water Commission. So we'll move on to water supply conditions. Christina.
Hi there. Yeah, so I'll just recap from last year. In 2021, you may recall that the Department of Water Resources allocation for contractors was 5%. And so our local purveyors that received Table A through Butte County's Table A supply did receive a full allotment because of our area of origin settlement agreement that provides 3,000 acre feet of water even under a 5% allocation. So their needs were fully met this last year, and that's Cal Water Orville and Del Oro Water Company. And then I'll just mention that the Joint District Board and Western Canal Water District, the irrigation districts, and the Butte Subbasin did receive a curtailment of 50% curtailment in 2021. So that's significant. The last curtailment was in 2015. And before that, it wasn't until back into the 90s. So definitely saw more groundwater pumping in the Butte Subbasin this summer because of that. And you see that reflected in the maps there that Kelly shared. In 2022, DWR just released their initial allocation on December 1st, which is a 0% allocation. We were contacted and they confirmed that we had submitted requests for, minimum health and safety water supply request for Delaware Water Company, and that is being met. But it's, as you know, really early in the water year, and they'll come out with a number of allocation updates as the season progresses.
I think the last time it was at 0% starting out was in 2014, which went up to 5% that in 2015. So hopefully we'll get some of that rain. Thank you, Christina. Does anyone have any questions? Additional information? Okay. We have our drought website. So we've been updating the drought website. Christina, I don't know if you had something to report on any additions to the website that Ludorf has been making?
Yeah, so those are still in the works, but we do have Ludorf Scamanini consultant engineers on in contract to help with some drought assistance. And I'll get into some of what they're doing later, but they're also helping with some of the website updates. So those are still in progress. We'll be working on that a little bit more this winter so that if, the conditions remain dry, we'll be, kind of fine-tuned our information heading into 2022.
Great, thank you. Next up is Elaine, who will talk about some well permit activity. Elaine, are you able to share your screen? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Kimmy. Good afternoon. I'm gonna give me a second here while I do that. Oh, there it is. Do you all see that okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Here's my contact information in case anybody wants to email me or call me. And we don't have a lot to provide in updates right now. As I've mentioned before, we are tracking the drought related well permits and track it so we can report on those and pull that data out of the system pretty easily. And also our small public water systems, we are tracking those as well. And let's see, this is kind of backwards actually. So I'm going to skip forward. I'm going to skip around a little bit. I apologize. So the well permits related to drought, you can see here this first table here. We have not received a lot of reports this month. So they really started to slow down September, October, and October basically. But this is the total number of wells that we have received so far. We have 15 in the Chico area. One of those is an ag well and the other 14 are domestic. And they average, or the range is 80 to 172 feet with an average of 119 feet. And then we have 3 in the Durham area. All of those are domestic. We do not have any well depth data for those. And we have 1 in Cohasset, also domestic. That was 84 feet. And then the bottom table here, I had reported these 2 previously as permits, but more accurately, we have 1 in Magalia that was due to them sharing a neighboring well, and that well went dry. And 1 in Palermo that was due to a creek going dry. So these are folks who have come in and submitted an application for a new well permit with our office and have reported that to be related to drought. We've had no new reports of our small public water systems. In the past, we are aware of Spring Valley School over on Pence Road and Highway 70, and that's the only one that we're really tracking right now. This chart I wanted to jump back to. This is just our overall well permits. It's not just the drought related, it's all of our well permits that are applied for. And you can see here in 2021, that's where we're at as of now. This report was just run a few weeks ago. So we don't see any visible impacts to our well permitting right now due to drought. You can see in other drought years, we've had much higher numbers in well permit applications. So right now, here we are in November, and we're not seeing that yet. I said before, we probably won't see that until into the spring months, and we'll continue reporting on those.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Elaine, when people report their well going dry, do we encourage them also to report it to DWR so it's part of that database?
Yes, I was just gonna say that when they do come in, we ask them to go and report that in the My Dry Water Supply. So those numbers should reflect the numbers that we're reporting on as well.
Oh, good. Okay.
Mm.
Any questions?
This is Christina. Can I just make one comment? Maybe can
Sure.
you go to your slide that shows the graph of well permits? Just one comment on this. I think that spike that we saw in whether that was 2014 or 15, probably 15, I think was related to the curtailments that occurred at that time, also to the Feather River water districts. And so there were quite a few, agricultural folks that put well permits in for potentially drilling wells. I don't think all of those were actually installed. And so we may have seen, that peak at that time. And that's one reason we're not seeing the same type of peak. Maybe folks that, anticipated needing a well did that in 2015, and we didn't see that same type of activity happen this year.
And similarly, in those other drought years where folks came in to either deepen their existing wells or drill a new deep well, those wells would then, we saw a lot of those folks coming in previous years, so they may not be experiencing those problems. And that's why we are also possibly seeing a lower number.
Mm-hmm.
I see that Eric has a question. Eric?
Yeah, this is for Elaine. I'm sorry, I'm unfamiliar with the process in Butte County for permitting a well. Do you folks do any kind of drawdown analysis or predictions of what a new well might do to the water levels in existing nearby wells?
That's a good question. For our small public water systems, we do look at that. For our domestic well permits, they have to show minimum gallon per minute in order for that to be used for a building permit or other potable use. But if you give me 1 second, I think that, I don't know if Nick is able to speak here, our land use program manager. I don't know if you have to.
Yeah, Nick can.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Nick. Yeah, with Butte County Environmental Health Program Manager for the Land Use Program. Just to follow up on that comment, for private wells, we do have 4 large diameter irrigation wells or ag wells, typically that are larger than 8 inches in diameter. We have setback requirements based on pump capacity to in hopes of preventing that issue of drawdown. But as far as domestic wells that are 8 inches and less in diameter, we don't have that same requirement.
Thank you, Nick. Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for Elaine or Nick? Great. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick.
All right. Next on our agenda, we have Louis Mendoza. Is he on? Let me see. Yes.
Yes,
there
I
he is.
am. Thank you. And my apologies, I have another meeting I have to run to. So after I give my update, I will have to check out, but please keep me posted on any actions or recommendations by the Drought Committee. So not as far as agriculture impacts, we're a regulatory agency. We don't do a lot of ag resource related work. However, I know in the rice situation, I know Luis is on, and I'll let him talk about, the flooded fields, water situation for them. We with the initial rain that we had on that Sunday in October, 3 or 4 inches, it started the forage production for our rangelands, pasture lands. However, we haven't had any significant rain since then. So we're hoping that for the livestock industry, rangeland grasses and support that we get additional rain. Most of all of our major crops are harvested now. I think you'll see growers a little antsy this winter coming up, that if we don't get any rain, we may potentially see some winter irrigation. So at this point, there's been very few irrigations after harvest, but we'll see what happens if we don't get any rain. Other than that, that's really all I have.
Great. Thank you, Louis. Anyone have any questions? All right. Anyone want to add anything to that? Louis? Okay.
Yeah, I'll
Oh.
just, sorry, this is Luis. Yeah, so I'll just add that, the rain we got on the rice, we had a large percentage of the rice that was already harvested. So it helped a lot with straw decomposition. So that was a positive. But still, and those growers that have water availability from pumping, there's some that have flooded their fields. But if you drive around, you see that it's not many. But like Louis said, I mean, there's a lot of expectation to see what's going to happen in terms of water availability and rain for the upcoming season. And, contingency plans are being made by a lot of growers, see if they can find water, or where can they cut some area.
Great. Thank you for that addition. Anyone else? Questions? Okay, thank you. I don't see John well, let me go back to my panelists. John Messina. Is there anyone else from fire on either side? No. Okay. We have other meetings happening at the county today, so I'm sure that's where some people might be, including Josh. Jimmerfield he's not on here. He's next on our agenda. I'll skip down to other drought reports and impacts. Does anyone have any additional things to add to the conversation? Okay. All right. Well, since Josh isn't here, and I don't think there's anyone representing OES and emergency water programs, we won't any updates on local drought actions and funding opportunities. Christina's up on the next, that's where you'll cover the Palermo, right?
Yeah, I'll talk about
Okay.
a couple things. Do you want me to dive into that?
Sure, unless there's any questions before that, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so in the summer, the board approved appropriation and contract with Ludorf County to do some drought assistance to pursue the small community water system or drought program. Yeah, small community drought program, which is DWR funding, drought funding. And so they have been in contact with for 4 potential projects for 4 small community water systems that are serving disadvantaged communities. And those include, let me just grab my notes here. The Foothill Solar Community Drinking Water Compliance Project, a Feather Ridge Estates Drinking Water Compliance and Fire Damage Replacement Project, Feather River School Drinking Water Compliance Project, and Berry Creek Elementary School. And then also Palermo Clean Water Consolidation Project. So those first 4, with some follow-up work, a couple of them are likely not a good fit for this particular funding source, and they're not ready at this time to really implement a project. This drought funding is really for implementation projects that are ready to hit the ground running. But work is continuing with Foothill Solar and also Berry Creek to pursue putting together an application for those small community water systems. So that is in the works. Palermo Clean Water Project is also part of this funding pursuit, and the situation there, as many of you know, is the Palermo community are households that are on their own private domestic water supplies and also served by septic systems. And because of the soil conditions in the area and drainage, there's frequent contamination to drinking water supplies from the septic system. So total coliform and E. coli has been detected in those water sources that are drinking water. So to address that health and safety concern, Butte County has been pursuing options for a long time, but South Feather Water and Power is a nearby agency that has treated drinking water. And so folks on private domestic wells could choose to hook up to South Feather for drinking water. And so this project, the Palermo Clean Water Consolidation Project, is seeking funding to do that kind of annexation project to bring treated drinking water to the community. So the drought program, small community drought program, is one of the kind of 2 or 3 main sources of funding that's being pursued for that project. In addition to the state revolving fund, so from the state board, and also some local funds that have been committed by Butte County from ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan Act. So that is the update on those potential funding sources for those drinking water needs.
Great. Thank you. Does anybody have anything to add? Kristen McKillop, I see you're on there if you wanted to talk about Palermo or provide any additional information. All right. Oh, there.
I don't really have anything else to add technically, but I just would like to put out there that we appreciate the opportunity to partner with the county on this, and hopefully we are successful in obtaining funding, and that we can actually have something in motion early in 2022 to finally bring resolution to this public health issue.
Great, thank you. Okay, Christina, you're up next too for the drought impact analysis consultant contract that's underway.
Sure. So one of the things that the board also appropriated funding for drought mitigation and analysis. And so part of that is this drought impacts analysis study. And so we did an RFP in mid-October for this work, and that closed in mid-November. And so we're in final contract negotiations with the firm to do this study. At our last drought task force meeting in September, we talked a little bit about the scope of work. And so really just a quick overview. It's looking back and summarizing conditions of 2021, which include kind of groundwater conditions, but also some regional water transfer programs and supplemental groundwater pumping programs that occurred throughout the region as part of the evaluation, and then estimating, groundwater demands in Butte County, both for ag and for municipal supplies, and looking at kind of well infrastructure, and trying to give us some good information going into next year of where we may see potential problems with domestic wells or water systems. So that is in the works. The timeline for that, where the board should be considering the contract at their meeting next week. So you can expect to see that on the agenda later this week. And then it's a tight timeline to have that work done by April 1st, really, so that we can have good information heading into the irrigation season next year. So stay tuned for that. We'll have more information at our next drought task force meeting, and be doing a lot of kind of data work this winter.
Great. Thank you. Oh, Jim Brobuck, you have a question?
Thanks. Thanks for letting me ask this. As Christina knows, I have a long-standing interest in the cumulative impacts to the Tuscan aquifer system that underlies several counties in our area. The cumulative impacts resulting from increased extractions associated with the water transfers and supplemental groundwater pumping that occurred this year that this study's going to be examining. So I'm very interested in the upcoming drought impacts analysis study that will include a detailed description of the amount of water pumped and as well as how the irrigation districts were compensated for this pumping and what the cumulative impacts will be to, I understand that it will be focused on cumulative impacts to Butte County. And I want to make sure that the study recognizes what the David's Engineering in their 2014 report and that their Sacramento Valley groundwater assessment, in which the report stated the greater the distance or depth between groundwater pumping and an affected stream, the lower the magnitude, but the longer the time scale of depletions. So that the longer the effects persist, or the longer the time frame the projects, the effects take to be observed, the longer the effects will persist, even if the pumping causing the effects is halted immediately. So these kind of long-term effects, I hope, is something that that we continue to monitor and try to correlate in our basin-wide observations, especially in interbasin coordination, because what happens on the other side of the river has long-term effects on this side of the river. And as we attempt to stabilize our groundwater levels, I think it's really important to be able to keep track of what's happening with the entire Tuscan water system, as well as probably the Tehama system, because they're so interconnected. And so I'm very enthusiastic about following this report, and hopefully there'll be funding to keep it going over the years, because I don't think the impacts are just going to go away after several months or even several years. So my thanks to Dr. Buck for getting this started.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I think it'll be a valuable piece of work for now and future planning. Yeah, so thanks for that.
Eric, I see that you have a question.
Hear me all right?
Yeah, pretty good.
How about now? Does that work?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Christina, I talked with you briefly about this. For those of you that don't know who I am, I was just recently appointed to the technical committee for groundwater advisor. And my first question is, have there been any meetings with any of those entities that raised all those concerns regarding the draft groundwater management report to sort of refine areas of interest? For example, just to use fish and wildlife for an example, they were also concerned with all these areas that they feel are sensitive habitat to draw down, but they haven't pointed out where those are. And I'm just thinking that it might be advantageous to meet with some of these folks that have a lot of concerns, to try to get some more details about what their concerns are and where they are, so that they could be considered as you go out and put in more monitoring system. So I was curious, assignments to them to develop some maps that show where their areas of concern are. And secondly, if you need any help or additional eyes looking over those proposals, I'd be happy to help you out there if you have a need for that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, good questions there. So we haven't done that yet in developing the GSP. Eric's referring to the VINA GSP, Groundwater Sustainability Plan, and comment letters that we received from a number of agencies. So we did work with a couple representatives from the Nature Conservancy in the early development of some of the groundwater dependent ecosystem identification and analysis. So there was some contact with those folks at that time. But I think that, following up on some of their comment letters and doing some of the things that you suggested could be part of, continued work after the plan is adopted, as we really start to frame up the details of where additional monitoring wells should occur and some of those things. So those are certainly conversations that could happen in the future. And yeah, just for clarification too, Eric Johnson was appointed by the Board of Supervisors recently to the Northern Sacramento Valley Integrated Regional Water Management Plan, TAC. So we're happy to have him joining that meeting. Will be happening, I believe, January 19th of 2022.
Great. Thank you, Eric, for your questions. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna hop back on our agenda because I see that Josh Jimmerfield joined us. Josh, I just had you listed for emergency water program and any other items that you wanted to discuss.
Yeah, thanks, Kami. Sorry about that. I got hung up in another meeting and then didn't have the link to this one, so but I got on here. So I did get information today from the state, and we'll see what we can do to push this along. We have submitted a grant application for temporary water storage containers and water hauling. We had thought that would move a little quicker than it has. They're looking right now, there were 72 applicants. We're number 40 on the list. Which means we've got a really good chance of getting funding. However, we're looking right now at early spring before we get approval to move ahead with that program. So that's one of the things that we're going to see if we can push on a little bit to fast track that more. We are working on getting the 2 contracts that would follow under that program to be ready to go, and hopefully that might help us with that. But in the interim, we are still providing emergency water for folks out at the Chico site. And that's the use has dropped off. We still got some consistent folks out there using it. And to date, I think we've supplied close to 45,000 gallons of water total to folks with dry wells in the community. So those are some of the things that we're still looking at. And I know there's a couple other programs in the wings that would be helpful for drilling new wells and support for folks that are looking to get wells repaired. So those are some of the things that we're looking at on that side. Other than that, it's really educational outreach that we'll start doing as we move into the spring and into next summer. Pending any questions, that's really what we've got going on for the short term for OEM assistance with drought.
Does anyone have any questions for Josh? All right. Thank you, Josh. I'm glad you joined us. Let's see, I'm going down my list. I have on here just kind of a 2021 drought review. Christina provided some review of items and then just a discussion for 2022 drought response activities. I didn't have anything specific on this item. I didn't know if someone would like to add any items that we haven't covered, maybe just thinking in this past year, and then what we want to focus on moving forward.
I think maybe just as a quick recap, some of this has been said already, but some of the 2021 activities that occurred, was pulling together and updating information and outreach type information. So our well owner flyer and our drought web pages, and putting together resources regarding water haulers, and of course the emergency water program that Jimmerfield's shop set up. And then the website as I mentioned, and then pursuing, some of this drought funding for some projects. So I think thinking about, going into next year, we'll have, like I mentioned, out of the drought impact analysis study, we'll definitely want to, kind of stay tuned for what comes out of that. I think we'll get some good information from that we can kick around to in terms of what potential responses the county may want to be poised to take in 2022. But in the meantime, I just wanted to throw out too, in the past, one of the things that we have done as part of drought response is increased our frequency of groundwater level monitoring. So we do have 3 stations in the county that have kind of telemetry, and those were repaired and kind of made up and running, at least 2 of them anyway, by the Department of Water Resources. So thanks to Northern Region Office and some staff there that got those back on board. But otherwise, we typically have groundwater levels measured in mid-March, kind of before irrigation season, and then once in July, once in August, and then after irrigation season in October. And some drought years, we have increased monitoring to monthly. So that would add, a May, June, and September measurement, I guess. So that's something to keep in mind too, if that would be something that the department should consider doing in 2022 if things, remain dry, or under what conditions might additional monitoring be advised.
And I guess we could probably look at that as we prepare our annual report by April 1st for not only the GSPs, but it'll include kind of our monitoring activities from this last year and what we usually report out to the board as well, right? And then I think as part of that, Kelly has also identified, if we have hit warning stages per chapter 33A, which sunsets, but we could use that as a guide as well. I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the kind of sections of the drought impact analysis study is to look at groundwater level conditions and potential areas of vulnerability. So it could be that we target areas for increased monitoring. It is a pretty big effort to do the whole round of groundwater level monitoring wells, but maybe we have a selection that targets those areas that we think may be more vulnerable to having wells go dry, or that would especially provide more valuable information on a more frequent time step. Maybe the whole network isn't necessary.
Does anyone else have anything to add? Okay. Any questions or thoughts from the public? Eric Johnson.
So I'm curious, if we get another drought year this next year, and maybe even another one the year after, is it too early to start at least communicating with people, with residents, and with ag about things that they should start to consider now? For example, what to plant and what not to plant. I know we can't force people, but certainly we might want to somehow encourage people to use less water demand crops in the event that we do have continuing droughts. And I'm just wondering if it's just too early, or if really that's something that we ought to be looking at now and developing communication plans in the event that we have another couple dry years immediately.
Luis, can you speak to that at all from kind of the ag perspective in terms of, how growers think about drought years?
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's a couple of points there that, large proportion of of ag in our county is rice and orchard crops. Rice allows you to fallow, but really there's very little alternatives to what can be planted in place of rice. Most of the rice ground we have is considered rice only. So for rice growers, it's really either fallow, not plant, or plant if you can. In the case of orchard crops, there's really no alternative. You can rotate with something for a year or two. So we do a lot of education about ways to try to be more water efficient, both in orchards and in rice. And through this drought and past droughts, we've put out a number of resources for growers to try to be more careful with water, or try to save as much water as they can. So that's available now, and we push that through newsletters, our meetings. We have websites where we have that information available. So that's something that we constantly do, and we will continue to do, because right now it's uncertainty for everybody.
Yeah,
I would-
Tammy,
Go ahead.
let me echo what Luis has said. I'm David Skinner, and chairman of the Water Commission. The word substitution of crops really doesn't apply. It's not practical. Because like Luis says, you can't turn off orchard crops, and yes, you can plant less rice. So in that respect, we really don't have many options to turn water off or change crops. And then going back to what Christina says, perhaps we need to target the monitoring of wells in selected areas. Think about where we want to go, what areas are critical now, and probably plan to execute those extra monitoring applications, given that it seems to be unlikely that we're going to pull out of this drought.
Would it be correct in saying, thank you, Chair Skinner and Luis, would it be fair in saying, and maybe Josh Jimmerfield could add to this as well, since we've been coming out of, or since we've been in this year of drought and we've implemented kind of emergency response, like providing water, that as we finish up the drought impact study, as we know what's in our annual reports from last year, and then we'll know what, let's say, state water project allocations are, that we could probably in the spring then identify, based on whatever the rainfall is, what needs will probably need to be implemented or continued throughout the year. And I think sometimes some of the things that slow us down when we're coming into a drought, not having been in one, are all the programs that then we have to find how to implement, get board approval. But now, since we would just perhaps be continuing that, and then we could know and plan ahead without necessarily going back to the drawing board. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, at least for the emergency management, we're absolutely looking at this being a 2 or 3 year program. So anything that we're doing on that side, we're planning 3 years out, assuming that worst case scenario. We'd have to look at it again, annually, but that's kind of the idea.
Mm-hmm. Chair Skinner?
I really don't have any comments. I didn't know
Okay.
who you were talking to.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that question too, Eric. All right, any other questions, comments? The next item on our agenda is just the discussion or any potential recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. Are there any items that we should be discussing to move forward to the board at this time?
Cammie, my reaction is plan for the worst and hope for the best. It doesn't seem likely that we're magically going to come out and there'll be no drought come April of 2022. So I think we have to be cautious and then plan accordingly. And then if it rains and we don't have and our aquifer fills up, great. But I doubt it. I doubt if we're going to be out of this in April.
Thank you. And is there any items that the public would like to speak on, not on the agenda? Eric, I see your hand up. I don't know if you wanted to respond to the previous item or just ask a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Mr. Skinner. I understand the difficulty in substitute crops, but I was thinking more like, I don't know, I look at something like almonds, which have fairly frequent, they only have a relatively short number of years of good productivity. And I was wondering if there'd be anything towards promoting something like olives or something that's more drought tolerant than the high water demand crops as they're being replaced.
The simple answer is no. Olives just don't have the margin that almonds do. So I would say growers would not change cropping conditions or would not change their permanent crop. Especially for olives, I think it's very difficult. It wouldn't pencil out.
Okay, thank you. I also think, Christina always is good to remind me that when we plan for drought, we're kind of planning for things happening in current time or real time. And then when we look at things like plans such as the groundwater sustainability plan, we're looking long-term. And I think there are proposed projects and management actions in all of 3 of the GSPs that take a long-term focus. And if we continue into 2-3 more, a couple more years of drought, that some of those projects will be implemented to hopefully balance out some of the issues associated with droughts. But again, the drought response is near-term. Groundwater sustainability planning is long-term, but hopefully there's things that do come to mind, like the extended orchard replacement program, Okay, so are there any other items that anyone from the public would like to bring up to the task force? Okay, I don't see any hands. Our next meeting, when would this group like to meet next? Just knowing some of the things on the agendas in the future. I think it's been once kind of quarterly. Am I correct in that, Christina?
Yeah, we've been meeting kind of as needed, and time, just kind of considering timeliness of available information and decision points that may be needed. I would say, we probably don't need to meet until March or even April, probably March. Even in March, if we don't have a final report, sorry about that, final report from the impact analysis study, we'll have a draft report and some of that information could begin to have a discussion about potential response. So my guess would be March, April timeframe would be time to schedule a meeting.
Do we typically pick a date now, or do we send something out a little closer to that time?
Yeah, we usually schedule, send a poll out to the drought task force members.
Okay. Because I'm looking at a calendar, and so if we were to kind of stick to either the beginning of March, we can send out a poll. So does that sound good to everyone?
I mean, groundwater level measurements will happen in mid-March. So if we want to wait till after that, then it would need to be more like what, Kelly, mid-April, early to mid-April.
Yeah, that would work.
Okay. And
Well, we
that could encompass also even describing the annual reports, the drought impact study. We'd have a lot of information to present, so that would be good.
Yeah.
So we'll target mid-April and coordinated around other board meetings.
That sounds good. We can
Okay.
always, if something comes up before then, we can always call one sooner, but I think that makes
Okay.
sense for kind of long term.
So we'll send out a poll for around that time. Okay. Perfect. So it sounds like this group will meet sometime in April of next year. But I know I'll see all of you before then. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.